developed by RDCs and RPCs. And literally, the budget bill just says, uh, I think it says $20 million for economic recovery grants, nothing else. No prioritization, no outline as to who gets what, no reflection on one of the things that's been brought to our attention. And we identified early that there are other pots of money like the restaurant pot of money and the shuttered grants. So there's nothing in there that tells us or the department how that money's to be spent. Similarly, with the capital grants, it just says uh, $11 million for capital grants as determined by the RPCs and RDCs. First of all, that's not right. We're going to determine how that money is, uh, what kind of guardrails are around that money, and the agency is going to make the determinations, not the RPCs or the RDCs. They may make suggestions. We have to put meat on the bone on virtually every section in this bill, as well as the governor's ARPA spending. And that's what we're going to spend the next 2 days rewriting this bill section by section. So let's get started. I can't remember whether it's Kathy. Kathy, are you here for the VSEA?
Yes, I am, Senator.
Okay. Why don't you talk to us about this northern border thing, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. And for the record, I'm Kathy Callahan, representing the VSEA. For 19 years, I served as the Employee Benefits Director in the Department of Human Resources. And among other duties, I was responsible for managing the state employees' health plan during that time. For the past 9 years, I've been a consultant to the Vermont State Employees Association regarding state employee health plan matters. As a result, I participated in the Labor Management Benefits Advisory Committee for 28 years on behalf of both the state and the VSEA. On April 21st, the VSEA became aware that Section 5 of H-159 would add the employees of the Northern Benefits Regional Commission, Borders Regional Commission, to the State Employees Health Plan. VSEA opposes the inclusion of the NBRC in the State Employees Health Plan at this time for reasons outlined below. What is the BAC? Well, the BAC is a longstanding labor management committee comprised of state and VSEA representatives who meet regularly to discuss and resolve important matters pertaining to the health plan. The committee is responsible for reviewing such matters as the plan's annual premium increases, the plan's financial liabilities, and the like. Most recently, the BAC worked very closely with the administration for more than a year to evaluate the plan's participation in the OneCare ACO. That was at the request of, excuse me, that was at the request of Suzanne Young, and it included the state and the VSEA members to try to do a deep dive into OneCare and determine what it was, how it operated, and whether we would want to go into that. For background on this issue, we only learned of this on April 21st, that this Section 5 was included in H-159. So this is brand new for us. But after having learned about it, on April 23rd, we spoke with DHR Commissioner Fastigi. She indicated that she had testified to your committee on April 8th. She indicated that she was called on very short notice to testify. And when I asked, she said she may not have mentioned the BAC process. She did indicate, though, that she had done some, that DHR had done some due diligence, and that adding this group would not raise legal issues such as ERISA. So that was all to the good. However, there are other important considerations. We're mainly concerned about precedent setting, and we're concerned about the speed with which this occurred to us. I understand that it was out there before, but we unfortunately hadn't learned of it. Over the years, many outside groups have been asked to participate in our plan. In my 19 years as DHR benefits director, several groups were declined. and for various reasons. Sometimes it's a legal issue, sometimes it's something else. It is very important to the VSCA and I think to the plan itself to adhere to standards or criteria in the matter of adding special groups to our plan. These are known as special groups. For history, the original special groups had a close nexus to state employees. The Vermont State Employees Credit Union, for example, was originally formed only for state employees way back in the day. And the other special group of note is the Vermont State Employees Association, which is comprised of 6,000 state employees. Subsequently, a few smaller Vermont entities, such as the Arts Council, have been added, and those have been added through the BAC process. I wanted to answer the question of whether state employees have a stake in the matter if the NBRC, am I getting this right? Yes. The NBRC would pay their own premium, their full premium, because it's been noted that if they did, what would be, the state employees' stake in this? The answer is that state employees and retirees pay 20% of the cost of the health plan. In 2021, their collective payments will equal $40 million. Although we understand that the NBRC would pay its full premium, state employees can be impacted by the addition of outside groups, nevertheless. Any individual can have a large claim. We are self-insured for large claims up to $750,000 per claim. So those are on us, those are on the plan. Several years ago, due to many large claims in one year, plan ran through its reserves and saw an 18% premium increase. It's unlikely that this situation will reoccur now because the plan carries a healthy balance, but we offer this information just for your perspective. The BAC would like to have an opportunity to fully review this matter as it does for other health plan matters. And as we just learned of it on April 21st, there has not been time to meet or to respond. We respectfully request the committee delete Section 5 at this time to allow the BAC to learn more about the NBRC and properly review this important issue. At the same time, we're not saying no and we're not against it. We just really need to be careful and do our due diligence and make sure that we're not leaving doors open that shouldn't be open, if you can understand what I mean. We do meet this Friday. There is a quarterly meeting at the BAC this Friday. And we've rearranged the agenda to include an opportunity for the committee to discuss this issue, because prior to that, we didn't have an opportunity. We also would like to talk with Rich Grogan, Mr. Grogan, at some point so that we can learn more about the NBRC. We'd like to know if they have health plan coverage now. We'd like to know if there's any urgency to their coming onto our plan right now. We'd like to make sure that if we want to do this and they want to do this, that it's doable and we can do it. And I would guess that it can be done certainly this year. But I hesitate to speak because these state employees that comprise the committee are working full-time jobs. And I just learned that one key person on the committee will not be able to attend Friday's meeting because of work commitments. These employees have to get time off, personal time off, to attend the committee meetings. So therefore, there's a little bit of a need for some time on our part to.
It sounds like the process, the usual process, has not been followed, and what you're suggesting, I was thinking while you were speaking that this bill still has a ways to go in the process, by the time it's likely to go to a conference committee, maybe another week or 10 days. And I was going to ask you, could you do your due diligence within that time period so we could move forward on that? It sounds like that's a possibility given the Friday's meeting. Am I incorrect on that?
No, you're not, Senator. You're not incorrect. We fortunately do have a meeting this Friday. It was a scheduled quarterly meeting. But we do need some time.
And you were not aware of this at all in the House?
No, we weren't. We weren't. I learned about it from Senator Luzzi, I'm sorry, former Senator Luzzi, on the 21st of April.
And
Right.
the other,
Somehow, we didn't
yeah.
know.
And do you know whether whether Miss Fastigi, is she a part of this BAC as well?
She sends a representative to the BAC,
Mhm.
the current benefits director, and she has worked with us before on the one care issue.
And she's heard your concerns at this
Yeah.
point. Does she respect the concerns to say that, yes, this is, regardless of whether on the merits it's the right thing to do or a, a non-issue as is something to do, does she, do you know, if she now shares your concerns in terms of the process?
I believe she does respect our concerns in terms of the process. We spent a lot of time together on healthcare issues. And I think what she did indicate to me when I spoke with her was that she was called to testify on very short notice.
Right.
And she wasn't sure whether she may have mentioned this process or not. I
She
can't
didn't.
speak for her, but
She did not mention it to us. I don't know if she testified in the House at all.
Yeah,
but-
that would be key. I mean, the House was discussing this for most of March. And I had thought Beth had testified in the House as well. But Rich can, in his testimony, can talk about this
Yeah.
because
So let's, in an effort to move this along, Kathy, do you have more to say, or do people have questions before we move to Rich?
no, in fact, I'd like to stay on for Rich's testimony. Actually.
You're welcome to do so.
Thank you.
So thank you, Kathy, and good morning, Rich. I think you've got a flavor of what's going on here. It sounds like we can get to yes, probably, but people want to do a little bit more due diligence here. So did you get to testify in the House on this?
No, I did not. Nope.
Okay, could you describe to us in your testimony how you think this got into the bill?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And I thought if it would be appropriate that I might just speak a little bit about the Northern Border Regional Commission and who we are, if that might be helpful and kind of situate us in Vermont just a little bit. I promise I won't take too much time.
Absolutely, because I think it's relevant to putting you in this group, because as Kathy said, you know, there has
Right.
to be some nexus to Vermont workers, I think.
Right. So I am a Vermont worker. I've served in this role as the first executive director of the Northern Border Regional Commission for about 2 years, and I live and work in South Reading, Vermont. And so for those who may not be familiar with our work, we are a U.S. government agency. We were created in 2008 as part of the Farm Bill. And our mission is to make economic development grants across 4 states, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and New York. We are part of a group of peer commissions that are active throughout the country. The biggest one that most everyone has heard of is the Appalachian Regional Commission, which covers portions of 13 states. We were modeled after the Appalachian Regional Commission, and I think it's important to say that it's common in US code for the creation of these commissions for there to be a provision to allow the commissions to access state benefits of member states. So I'll come back to that with a specific provision a little bit later. In 2018, the NBRC's territory was expanded significantly, and in that year, notably, we were expanded to include every county in Vermont. The entire state of Vermont is eligible for NBRC grants. In terms of situating ourselves in Vermont, I think the state has always played an active leadership role in the commission, certainly led by Senator Leahy. The federal delegation in particular has been a champion of the organization and has worked with us to expand the funding available for communities. And at the state level, Governor Scott served as the organization's first state co-chair from 2018 to 2020. With regard to our funding, which I think is appropriate for this venue, we're funded almost entirely with federal dollars, although each state pays some annual dues that help to fund the administrative costs of running the commission. So just to give this committee some context, the commission's total budget for deployment this year is $38.5 million. Each state pays about $42,000 in administrative dues that help cover the costs of staffing and things like that. Since 2010, through our economic and infrastructure development and several other grant programs, we have invested about $27 million into the state of Vermont through our program. Again, just to give you some idea of size and scale. This program is a federal-state partnership, which is a little bit unusual for federal programs, I think. The governance of the commission consists of a presidentially appointed federal co-chairperson and the 4 governors of the MBRC states. And each of those governors appoints an alternate to work on the day-to-day business of the commission. And so in Vermont, we're served by Tate Brooks at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And I think another kind of interesting component of our work is that all grant-making decisions are made at the state level. And we feel like this ensures a local economic development connection to the work. So, of course, that's just a little bit of background. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I wanted to dive into, the main event and why you asked me here today. And hopefully I can answer. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, before you do that, because this is very interesting and timely on other parts of our bill, I've been having conversations with ACCD about some structure for the new capital grants that the governor's proposing with ARPA money, and trying to find a template for that and a decision-making mechanism. And I'm trying to understand a little bit more about what kind of things you fund and why. I mean, in the simplest of all worlds, I've been striving in a lot of our conversations to say, as opposed to establishing a new program, can't we give an existing program more money and let them give it out? Now, I understand there are differences with the governor envisions and what MBRC does, but I need to know a little bit more about that, because it sounds like in some cases they may be not necessarily duplicative, but parallel. So I'd like to hear what kind of grants you give out and what's your process. So going to take a little bit more time here because it's relevant for what we're going to do the rest of the morning. So,
of course, yeah, I'm happy to speak about that. So it's prescribed in U.S. code that there are 7 funding areas that we can provide funding for. But within that, there's a lot of flexibility, and I'd be happy to provide as a follow-up to the committee the specific statutory language of those 7 funding areas, if that would be helpful to you all's work. But at a broad brush, a lot of what we do is infrastructure. We are asked to do a lot of, for example, local at the municipal level, water, sewer, broadband, rural healthcare. Things that people would consider part of what Congress has called the basic public infrastructure. We also do a lot of economic development related projects that don't fall into an infrastructure category, but that I think are pretty crucial. So things, a big flavor of that is workforce development. We've partnered with several community colleges across the region, other institutes of higher learning, as well as local organizations that are working on projects. For example, one of my favorite projects that we funded just within the last year is actually working to connect retiring business owners with younger entrepreneurs who might be interested in taking over those businesses so that those businesses remain locally owned in our community. So that's just an example. We have also funded projects focused on the forest products industry. I mean, originally, the MBRC was created to address the decline in the forest products industry across communities broadly across the Northern Forest. So some of the projects that we have funded have focused on new technologies, for example, for forest products, as well as worker retraining, so that people who worked in a former version of the forest products industry might be able to be retrained to work in a more technology-forward, technology-focused forest products industry.
So your budget, if you gave out 27 million to Vermont in the last 10 years.
Yep.
Are you generally running about $2 to $3 million in terms of grants to Vermont each year?
So actually, that number has grown significantly. So in the last year, in 2020 and in 2021, the number is about $4.6 million each year for Vermont. The MBRC grew from 2010 to about 2015 at a very slow pace. And then our appropriations increased significantly starting in 2016, 2017. So it's a little bit of a hockey puck. I'm pretty proud of the fact, or a hockey stick, excuse me. I'm actually originally from North Carolina, so I'm still getting used to references and metaphors for ice sports. But anyway, beside the point, I think that what I'm pretty proud of is that we have designed an administrative structure, and that actually is appropriate for the benefits provision. We've designed an administrative structure that allows us to get an increasing amount of money out the door without adding a lot of staff members, because we have a pretty well-defined group of types of projects that we fund, and we have administrative systems in place that allow us to be pretty efficient with that. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but basically the number has grown. Part of our appropriations growth, though, has also been in some complementary sources of funding. For example, this year we received a special appropriation for broadband projects, and we've worked with each of the 4 states to put an additional $1.25 million into gap funding for broadband projects based on state identified needs. So there's that kind of federal state partnership again. We also have a program, fortunate to receive some funding for the last 3 years via USDA's Rural Development Program. And the commission has directed that funding in the state of Vermont to being able to fund some capacity building at the state level for the outdoor recreation economy work that's going on in the state. And the commission is actually building an outdoor economy council that will bring together that capacity from across all 4 states to try to develop some regional synergies in that crucial economic sector. Because there's some similarities obviously between the regions that we cover between Vermont and the other states.
So it sounds to me, I don't know how visible you are. I know for me, you're not that visible, but it sounds like the work you do really supplements and overlaps with so many programs this committee deals with. I'm thinking about the Working Lands Enterprise Fund, VOREC, broadband. So many things are out there. It's good to know that these added funds are there. It's a little, I wonder again, how many different silos we have here doing similar things. But let me move on to
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
yes.
Can you see us? It's Allison. Rich, hi. It's good to have you. And Kathy,
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Kathy. I'd like to know how many employees you have, because this is relevant to this conversation. How many employees do you have? How have you managed healthcare without us? We're now a year behind. Ted Brady originally proposed this, I believe, in 2019. Is that correct? And
yes.
So I'm a little puzzled. I'm puzzled that we haven't all been, communicating with the appropriate crowd here. So how many employees and how, and at another point, I'd love to know, and I think this committee would love to know the difference between your funding priorities and USDA's, because I think for a lot of us, we thought that USDA's local funding that Ted, of course, did before covered some of these bases. So, but how many employees and what have you been doing about healthcare if you haven't had this opportunity?
Thank you.
Before we get into those questions, which is the heart of the section of the bill, I just want to finish up on background on your organization because it's relevant to other things we're about to go into. And I think the remaining question I have is, what is the structure and process for deciding on who you give the money to? Is it a competitive program? Do people come to you and ask you for grants? Who are the decision makers? what's the state's role?
Okay.
And then we'll get into exactly what Senator Clarkson's talking about, because that's relevant to the section of the bill.
Sure. So yes, it is a competitive grant program. We have seen an incredible growth in not only the amount of requests that we have, but the amount of leverage that those projects are bringing to the table in the last 2 years. So our selectivity rating, so last year we were able to fund about 30 to 35%. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, and I don't want to give you a false number of the applications that came into us region-wide. So yes, it's a competitive grant program. The way the process works, we partner with what's called a state program manager. So Senator Clarkson mentioned Ted Brady. Currently, that governor's alternate, as I mentioned earlier, is Tate Brooks. There's also Christy Farnham, whom some of you may know at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, serves as our state program manager. We have an equivalent in each of the 4 states. And those individuals are really responsible for answering incoming inquiries from potential applicants, helping them to kind of shape their projects. We really want that to happen at the state level so that, again, there is this real kind of connection to state economic development priorities and local economic development priorities. But those applications come into us. It's actually appropriate we're having this conversation this spring because May 14th is our deadline for our applications to be submitted. Those applications come to the commission, so to our staff. We review them for eligibility. So also in US Code, we can only fund nonprofit organizations, primarily that are focused on economic development, any municipalities or instrumentalities of government, and Indian tribes, all of which are eligible entities. We can't fund for-profit industries, anything like that. So we make sure that they're eligible, that all of the budget information looks good, is eligible for federal dollars, et cetera. And then those applications go to the states to be scored. At the beginning of every year's application round, which this year was March, we release materials that include a scoring matrix for each state. And each state looks a little bit different based on what their priority is. So this information is all available publicly for any interested applicant. And then when the applications are completed and submitted and sent to the state after we've done the eligibility review, that state program manager I mentioned, so Christy in Vermont, puts together a scoring team.
I've lost his sound. Have other people lost the sound?
No,
Oh.
I'm fine. You may need to, I don't know, sometimes.
Could you maybe shut off your video, Rich? Because I lost the last 20 seconds of what you were saying.
It may not be Rich's problem because we're all hearing him.
Oh, okay. Well, let me try mine.
Rich, I'm not sure I'm not sure you're the challenge here because I think we're all hearing him. Keisha, you and Randy, are you hearing Rich?
Nothing has changed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm hearing
it's
fine.
changed for us, Michael. I think it's on your end. Not that we would
I
ever.
just eliminated my video and I'm going to mute myself. Maybe I'll hear better.
Okay, let's see. Rich, give
Yeah,
it.
can you hear me now?
Michael, can you hear him now?
I can hear him now. I'm going to go on mute. Okay.
Great. Well, I'll rewind just a second because that was the kind of last few seconds were pretty crucial for the scoring process, which is
Right.
that the state program manager, together with the state governor's alternate, organizes a scoring team every year to review the applications that come, in this example, from the state of Vermont, and prioritizes those applications vis-a-vis the state's allocation. So we talked earlier about how much money goes to the state of Vermont every year. This year, as I said, it'll be about 4.6 million through this one program. So they prioritize applications and determine which ones they wish to fund. That goes to the governor for his final approval. Again, just another layer of we feel like these are the priorities that my administration wants to represent for the state of Vermont or our other states. And then those come to the full commission for a vote. Typically that's in August, late summer. And And that full commission of governance, as I mentioned earlier, but quickly, is the 4 governors of NBRC states and the federally appointed co-chairperson. That person is here, that federal person is here specifically to keep an eye on appropriate use of federal funds. And so currently it's a he, but he or she is able to basically another layer of accountability, say yes or no, I think this is a good project, or I think it's not. By the time we get to that point, it's usually not a big controversy, but that's kind of how the process works. And then we also, I would say, do our best for applicants who are not funded. We do try to help them find other avenues for them to receive funding. And that may include, as has been brought up by Senator Clarkson, USDA, Economic Development Administration through U.S. Department of Commerce as another go-to person. Occasionally there are state funding sources. You mentioned, Senator, some silos. I think that's probably true, but there's also some overlap and some synergies. For example, through the Brownfields program, there may be a site ripe for economic development that has worked through the Brownfields program, and then their next tranche of funding might be through NBRC, or another federal agency or state agency to kind of help take that project to the next level. We see that pretty commonly as well. In fact, those applications that have done some engineering work, have done some site work, particularly for infrastructure, have done some environmental review, tend to be much more competitive by the time they get to the scoring round, just because they're more, I hate to use this term, but they're more shovel ready than some projects that may just be kind of co-ed. So.
Great, thank you. Michael, are you able to join us again?
Yes, that's very helpful. Let's move on to the section of the bill and answer Senator Clarkson's questions, but tell us why you think this is an appropriate action. One of the questions is burning in my mind from the very beginning is, you're a federal employee. How come you don't have a health insurance through the federal government?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So actually, I am not a federal employee.
Okay.
And neither are most of the staff members of the commission. I appreciate you asking that question, because did put that in my notes to talk about, but it's an important point. We are actually statutorily prevented from hiring federal employees to staff the commission. As I mentioned, we have a presidentially appointed federal co-chairperson that is obviously a federal employee. He or she is allowed to hire their own staff if they wish, and those can also be federal employees. Other staff cannot be federal employees, and again, that's in 40 U.S. Code Subtitle 5. That is true for all the commissions. Some of us are funded through federal plus those state dues dollars that I mentioned earlier, and some of us are funded through federal funds, but we're specifically not federal employees. So it's an interesting challenge as an executive director to be overseeing a sort of parallel organizations within the same organization. I could bore the committee with all the details of that, but I won't this morning. I think, but it does make for some interesting situations. So yes, we do have a couple of federal employees. They participate in federal human resources. They have federal human resources support. They have federal benefits. They're part of the federal STEP pay system, all that kind of stuff. We've had to design all of that over again for the non-federal employees. So, referencing Senator Clarkson's question, currently we have 4 employees who are not federal staff members, and we do offer healthcare to them, which I have put together kind of an a la carte benefit structure. And so currently we have Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield that we are basically tapping into as any small business would. So I want to be clear with the committee that, we also probably over the next 2 years will be adding another 2 to 3 employees, but our growth is really capped. I mean, as much growth as we have seen in the last few years, which I'm very proud of, because our territory is sort of maxed out. There's not, there's not like an unlimited ceiling on the amount of growth that we can have. And because of this pretty unique model where we utilize state resources as partners, there's not really a need to add a lot more staff at the commission level. I mean, I anticipate we may have some turnover, but this is not something where we're going to end up with, 15, 20 staff members. I think at most we'll end up with, 6 or 7 staff members. And admittedly, they're, potential dependents who might be participating in a benefits plan. So my concerns, I mean, my reasons for, being interested in this issue are, first of all, I think Congress, I don't want to speak for Congress, but I think they anticipated some of the challenges of this kind of parallel structure of organizations that I mentioned earlier, and they specifically put a provision in U.S. code. It's under 40 U.S.C. subtitle 5, section 15304, where they, and I'll quote from that, they are allowing the commission to provide for coverage of commission employees in a suitable retirement and employee benefit system by making arrangements or entering into contracts with any participating state government. And this is actually the situation with the Appalachian Regional Commission as well. They actually have a similar arrangement to this with the state of Maryland. I'm sure it might be a topic on this committee's mind. I have tried to get those copies of those documents from the Appalachian Regional Commission and have so far not been successful in doing that, just because it would make everything easier if there was a template. But I do want to just share that there is some precedence for this. I'll also say, as a public service organization, we're always trying to find efficiencies. I've articulated that I think we have a pretty good staffing ratio for the amount of money that we put out the door. And we're interested in continuing to maximize the amount of money that gets out to communities. So from an efficiency perspective, I think we would like to, make our provision of benefits for our employees as efficient as possible. The other thing is, as a small agency, we currently pay premiums based on employee age. One of the attractive things to us about the state benefit system is that it is, my understanding, is that we would pay the same premium regardless of employee age. I'm concerned about future-proofing for the Northern Border Regional Commission. If, for example, I were to leave and go to another job and someone 10 or 20 years older than me were the replacement for me, that would be a significant cost increase. And I think we're also kind of at the whims of the market in terms of, I think Kathy articulated earlier the idea of having, a large claim and how that might impact the broader benefits system. I think we're very fearful of that when we're talking about, currently we have 3 people participating in our healthcare program. So any claim is going to have an extremely disproportionate impact, on that kind of small group of people. And so, part of this is trying to be a good steward of public dollars, to be perfectly honest, and trying to make sure we're being as efficient as possible.
Let me interrupt for a second. We're going to need to move on. So how did this section get in the bill? Did you approach a legislator and ask for this, or this is something that Ted Brady has been asking for a while? What's the history on that?
So I actually started by talking to Ted, and mentioned this to him, assessing whether there might be support for it at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. He connected me to Representative Kimball, who's my local representative in South Reading, and I also spoke with Senator Clarkson about this early on, and I believe it evolved from there.
Okay, so we're gonna I see that Kathy has her hand up. So Kathy, go ahead.
I have just one quick question. I don't want to take up much of your time, but Rich, you indicated that there are 4 different states that you're involved with. And when I looked on your website, I saw that most of these are in New Hampshire. You have a Concord, New Hampshire residence, and your employees have 603 area codes, phone numbers. I'm wondering why you haven't approached the state of New Hampshire or New York, for that matter, about
So-
this?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We are actually building a virtual organization. So the organization was headquartered in New Hampshire originally. But as soon as I came on board, I decided that I wanted to actually build out a structure where we had employees embedded in each state. We haven't hired anyone from New York yet, but so far we have employees in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont.
How many?
Earlier, I talked.
So this is going to get into some of the things that I think are perhaps more appropriate for your meeting on Friday in terms of the weeds. And I'm hopeful that there can be some progress made on Friday. If not, the committee will have to deal with it. I don't know that this bill is going to get out by Friday, but even if it does, whatever form it takes on this issue, I can assure you that this will be an ongoing topic of conversation in the next 10 days to get
Okay.
to.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, and I apologize because I know I took up most of the time myself trying to learn about the commission, but I do want to move on to the rest of the bill, and we have a bunch of witnesses on the
Thank you,
recovery
Rich
grant.
and Kathy.
So I
Yes.
thank
Thank
you
you.
both.
Welcome.
I
Senator.
appreciate the
Yeah.
opportunity. Thank you. And if I can be of help for any of those other issues in the future to talk further about the commission, I'm happy to come back.
Yeah,
We-
that's
I
very
think
helpful.
love that.
Very
That'd
helpful.
be great. And we wish you well on Friday with
Thank
you and
you.
Kathy.
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. I think the next topic is recovery grants. And I think our first witness is Talina, and we want to learn what, for this money, what structure you'd like to see in terms of priority funding. I've already heard
Mr.
about.
Chair,
Yes.
I know Austin has to go at 9:40 to speak in another committee. I didn't know if Talina was okay having him speak for.
Be fine with me. Is that
I
okay?
just learned that early in the
Okay.
before we went
Okay.
live.
So what we're trying to do, as I said before, is we want to put some meat on the bone on this. I think the presumption is from the agency at this point, they would love, for administrative reasons, to combine whatever money comes out of the budget with the money that came out of 315 and not have differing eligibility and grant amount requirements for those. I don't think this committee is necessarily wedded to that. We could have different parameters for the new money versus the last money. The last money was a little different in the sense that it was designed right from the beginning to go to people who have never received any other funding. So this is a different pot of money, though I think we all can agree that there is some value in parallel tracks. But with that in mind, Austin, love to hear your thoughts in terms of how we can structure it. And, I think this committee, you've heard us say before, we're really interested in targeting the money to those most in need. It's not a bottomless pit of money. So any dollar that goes to a business that's not as needy means that a business that perhaps is in need gets less. So that's our challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everybody, for accommodating my hectic morning schedule. For the record, Austin Davis, Government Affairs Manager with the Lake Champlain Chamber. Thank you again for this time. And I passed to Nathan a letter LCC sent to the Appropriations Chair, as well as you, Mr. Chair, and Senator Ballant in her position as pro tem. And, kind of I'm going to outline some of that in my testimony here. That should be on your committee website. And, I just guess I'll keep it very brief.
It is on our website.
I'll keep it very brief, and really just what we're envisioning is a hybrid of what the what ACCD has proposed. So I think, the governor included in his budget 50 million for economic recovery grants. And we feel that that amount is insufficient, as his own outlining documents acknowledge that there are about 500 million. There's about 500 million in demonstrated unmet need. A later report showed that just the ski areas alone have another 100 million as well. However, we understand that there's not a limitless supply of funds, and that due diligence need to be done. So what we requested at that time was the additional 50 million be appropriated to the agency, which they could administer through their bridge grants, which was earlier called GAP grants. And, that was established under H315, now Act 9. As you said earlier, Mr. Chair, there was a targeting of those businesses that received nothing. However, there's a second tier, obviously, that was created in the wake of ARPA that then allowed individuals who had received some assistance previously, however, not enough, to apply for grants, with priority given to those who've received nothing, and secondary priority to those who had received something and not quite enough. So what we were envisioning was appropriating that $50 million and then creating the authority for the Joint Fiscal Committee to, in the time after adjournment, receive the Agency of Commerce's Community Development's 2 reports required by the grant programs enabling statutory language, and outline the program use and any oversubscription of the grant program at that time, and then charge the Joint Fiscal Committee to make additional appropriations to the grant program within a reasonable amount of time, should the ACCD report that that grant program is oversubscribed and there's a demonstrated unmet need that is viable. This letter was signed by the Lake Champlain Chamber, the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, Main Street Alliance, Vermont Retail and Grocers Association, the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, and the Vermont Ski Areas Association. Some of those folks are obviously on here today, and I'll let them expand on their additional opinions on legislation, how to move forward on this going forward. I just wanted to present this as kind of our perspective on how to make the most out of the what was already established under Act 9, how to address demonstrated unmet need, how to ration the amount of American Rescue Plan Act dollars we currently have available to us, and how to also create eligibility in the off session to address this need that we think will be under the definition that this committee passed, substantial. I would add just 2 more things. The 10 million in bridge grants provided by H315, now Act 9, was not part of the 50 million request, as those 2 numbers were arrived at by different scopes of work and different demonstrated unmet need. So, we'd ask that, while I know that there is an appropriations restriction on you folks that you're working within, there's also a lot of legislative muscle in this committee, and we just hope that we could see that full 50 million appropriated to this. I'd also just caution that there's a great deal of expectation around the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, or RRF, as folks are calling it. And I just, echo the thing I've been saying this entire pandemic, which is just expectations are a down payment on disappointment. I'm not sure how much assistance Vermonters will actually get from this program, as it's only about 28 billion or 28.6 billion, I believe is the exact number, in federal funds. And there's about 200 million in unmet need out there. There's also some provisions that will likely keep Vermonters from jumping into the program immediately. So I just think that given all that, there's going to be a lot of demonstrated unmet need in the state. We're thankful for the fact that you folks came to a definition, while there is some controversy about about that definition, and there are some folks who are obviously unhappy with it. We're happy at least that there is a definition of demonstrated unmet need, and we'd hope that when the variables you chose for that definition deliver a result, that you can backfill any program to match that result.
One thing, Austin, thank you. One thing, I know you're good with numbers, so I want you to double check my math. I looked at the restaurant recovery thing, and I think $28 billion, the norm that everybody uses in terms of Vermont's share, if Vermont restaurants stepped up as aggressively as other states, would be about $50 million. Now maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's 5 million. That's what I want you to check. But as a proportion, it's possible that the Vermont restaurants could get as much as 50 million, which dwarfs the entire thing, even the governor's number of 50 million. So I don't understand. I'm not saying I don't understand. I'm saying that it would seem to me that to make our money go further, we would direct a lower priority or a higher, we would direct the restaurants to go there first before they came to this pot of money. The same with the shuttered venues. And that should free up some more money for businesses that are in need, like the Lodging Association. In fact, we even got, I think we'll hear from the Lodging Association today. I think they more or less, suggested the same. So, so I think we should look at that. And I also, in my brief review of the restaurant grants, I was glad to see that they have special set-asides for small restaurants to get priority. I think up to 9 billion of it goes to smaller restaurants and those who might not be so sophisticated to apply. So we don't have a PPP situation where the big companies come in and swoop up all the money. So I'm hoping, and with technical assistance and ACCD's help and other agencies, that all those restaurants do apply for as many dollars as possible under that set aside.
And with both, Mr. Chair, both programs, of course, have the 3 weeks of priority eligibility for women and BIPOC owned businesses. So that one would assume many of those were smaller businesses in the first place. So that is also an important thing that we need to be encouraging our Vermont businesses to do ASAP, because Shuttered Venues is open now.
Certainly, I share your enthusiasm and hope that those programs will cover the unmet need. We're all coming off the tail end of a very difficult year, which has severely limited my enthusiasm and optimism. I hope you folks are right. I also want to prepare for the circumstance in which it's not that beneficial to the state. I think, it would be fantastic if we could see 50 million from that program. I have my doubts. And, I think, when did Noah build the ark? Before the rain? The worst case scenario there was that he would just been the idiot with a big boat in his front yard. We need to prepare for the worst case scenario, which might be that we don't get the assistance we want from that. I'd also say that, so there are multiple factors at play. There is that 9 million carve out, as you acknowledged. I think that might be eaten up. I think the preponderance of the unmet need across the United States is actually in those smaller businesses. So I worry that carve out will get eaten up very fast. I'd also just note that on the Shuttered Venues operating grants, those aren't very helpful to a lot of Vermont venues. They were kind of written with larger national venues in mind. And so if venues don't have very complicated, ticketing, seating, other things, things that you would associate with, a stadium or larger venues you'd expect in larger metropolitan areas, those folks have an easy time in that. I know a number of venues. As many of you know, we operated a restart committee, an ad hoc restart committee with event venues working on event restart guidance. And I think maybe of the 35 stakeholders in that, one has gotten access to that program. So it's not the cornucopia that we hoped. It was kind of built for the big dogs, and not really the Vermont scale kind of artisanal folks that we have here who are doing a different kind of events.
Could we do anything about that? Or is that just the nature of the federal program?
That's unfortunately just the nature of the federal program, both the enabling statute and then also the IRS promulgated regulations. So, that's unfortunate. I think that also paints the need for additional grants. I think, that kind of is a perfect segue, I think, to what others have to say, which is that there is, if you were to revisit the definitions in H315, now Act 9, and there is a definitely a reason to enable larger grants and different base periods for the grants, allowing folks to apply through with 2021 demonstrated need and losses, allowing folks to take more than 3 months, maybe 6 months, and also larger grant caps. I think, it's hard for larger venues, and I don't want to mention anybody here just because I don't want to violate trust, but, I know larger venues that aren't covered by SVOG, that shuttered venues, who are in a difficult position because they're highly leveraged with debt. So things like EIDL aren't good for them because that's just welcome to 20 more years of debt servicing and additional debt. Then there are folks who PPP doesn't work because payroll is such a small component of their business. They might have a large venue worth a lot of money, but they only need 10 staff or less to actually operate the venue. And then the economic recovery grants last year were capped, and so it's a matter of, okay, congrats, you got this grant. That's like 3 weeks of utilities and maintenance for you. So there is I think that one assumption that folks have of recovery efforts to date has been that larger folks made out well, smaller folks did not. I think that's true, but I think there's some folks who are in the middle that are kind of falling through the cracks because they may appear large, however they're actually pretty small. They're almost like middle class, if you will, and just nothing really works for them. And the amount of aid they've been able to get is just de minimis compared to the large overhead costs, the large debt liabilities they carry that they need to service on a regular basis, and then everything else. So
I agree with you. You're welcome to our world. How to structure these grants is really hard, and for legislature to have any input, sometimes I get to the point and say, just give the money to ACCD and let them figure it out. I don't know if you'd appreciate that as well, but the caps on the grants and the 3-month stuff, we accepted that from the House. We didn't have a lot more time to deal with that, but I was going to ask you specifically in the time you have left, and you mentioned that, you wanted to extend it to 6 months of fixed cost and add more things into fixed costs and raise the cap amount. Aren't there winners and losers when you do that? I mean, to the extent that you give bigger grants to certain businesses, there's less money around to the number of applicants. And it's so hard to come up with the right formula here as to how to do that. And I admit that we didn't spend a lot of time on the 3 months and the 150,000 that came to us from the House in 315. And that's one part we sort of said, okay, we're not going to touch that. To this day, I don't know if that's the right amount. I don't know if that was the amount that the administration proposed as to how to cap these grants, but I'm sure when they put those caps in, they were deciding that we can make this money go to more people if we limit the size of the grants. So it's a challenge, but you're
Yeah.
convinced, and that's one of the things I want to talk about this morning. You're convinced that you'd like to see the potential for larger grants going out in this formula.
Well, I think I have two tiers of priority from this conversation. And I'll just say I have a lot of sympathy for you folks. I mean, you are pulled in a lot of different directions, and there is a lot of different nuanced need out there. So, I mean, I think, politics is the art of the possible. And so I'd say, my first priority from this conversation is just more grant funding. I think that there's a substantial amount of unmet need out there. As I said, the governor acknowledged 500 million while requesting 50 million. I don't fully understand the reasoning for that, other than maybe a kind of supposition that there are federal programs that might take care of some of that need that we're now shedding some doubt on and reduced our expectations, curtailed our expectations. I'd say, second priority would be beyond what funding is available, creating a mechanism for the report from ACCD on the program usage and potential oversubscription to be received during the time post adjournment and pre-you reconvening in January. I think that's that's my second priority. And I think at that time, it'd be appropriate for whoever receives that in the off session and has legislative statutory authority to do that, to also have statutory authority to make an appropriation. Because I think if you see that unmet need and you try to address that unmet need in January, we all know that likely more recovery grants are less likely, less politically palatable come January, just because I think folks won't be in the pandemic anymore. And it'll seem like, okay, they've survived. And economic scarring is just a difficult thing to talk about. It'll require folks kind of coming to you, opening up their guts, and just kind of explaining all the suffering that they're having in their personal and business financial life. Second, so I think that, if we could have in January the statutory authority for some kind of legislative body to appropriate additional ARPA funds to meet the oversubscription and get at that acute need when it's needed to prevent additional long-term scarring and help us get out of our economic slump faster, that would be great. I'd say then my third tier priority out of the conversation is a look at how can we make the program help folks better in all of their nuanced situations. And I think really the only answer I have there is flexibility for ACCD to look at people's individual situations and make assessments based on that. And I think that they have a good long track record on that. I can understand, you folks having the power of the purse and being in a supervisory role to ACCD, having your doubts around doing that. That's where I would say that, I think in 315, you did a fairly good job of drawing the parameters and setting things in motion. I think we can maybe revisit that and create more parameters by which they have to keep within, but have more flexibility to address these one-off situations, such as a venue that, if things were done differently, might have gotten shuttered venues, or folks like in Talina's constituency and group, who have very different kind of operating mechanisms than many other businesses because they're facilitators. To our event coordinators out there, who their revenue streams are very different than anybody else's, and they just don't fit squarely into anything. And then to our lodging folks, who it's very difficult for them to just, to have operated in the last year purely because of, the need for travel restrictions. So, like I said, just to recap, 3 tiers of priority, just more funding in general, if at all possible, the ability for the reporting required by statute under Act 9 to be received in the off-session months, with a potential for an additional appropriation of ARPA funds at that time, similar to what you folks did with CARES before adjournment last year. And then third priority would just be more flexibility for ACCD to meet people where they're at and look at their individual circumstances and maybe tailor aid to best suit them. And I think, as long as if we can put criteria together on that third tier priority that can be followed, documented, and applied consistently, then I think we can have a good situation where everyone can feel good about that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Obviously, I don't mean to pass the buck here. And some of these points we will raise with the Appropriations Committee, but the amount of money put in is really ultimately the decision of the Appropriations Committee, where we have to work with them to come up with a number. And as you've seen in the letter that was penned by Senator Kitchell, the amount of demands for this money go well beyond economic development, and she has the task of coming up of how to cut up the pie. So I'm not saying we're unsympathetic, but I'm also saying probably on that number one front, the advocacy effort has to be there and in the House appropriate with the House appropriators on this, who I think have been basically this all happened after they voted the budget out. So there's still an opportunity. I would like to see some, in terms of the direct answer to my question, whether your specifics of bigger grants, more fixed costs as a cap, I wish we could have some flexibility there where we can review how things are going initially and make adjustments going forward if we've missed the mark in H315. I don't know how we would do that, but we'll be talking about it some more. If you have any ideas, we'd welcome that.
Under Act 9, there are 2 reporting requirement dates by ACCD. And as I was saying earlier, and I'm trying to remember exactly when, but I do remember one being 30 days after the funds revenue is exhausted. And I can look up the language on that. I mean, I think at that point, that's an exhaustion of about $10 million. My supposition would be that $10 million would likely be taken up primarily with the first tranche of eligible folks being those who have received no support to date at all and have fallen through the cracks everywhere. I think then you'll look at a situation where they might run into analysis paralysis because they're going to see a whole host of folks coming to them with demonstrated unmet need. And I think that's going to far exceed, what was appropriated to that. So that might be your second crack at that second look at that. Well, if they have, an estimated, say, 2,000 folks who have approached to them,
Right.
You'll have the data on what their deltas are there. And you can look at that with ACCD in the summer if there's legislative authority to meet in the summer and actually take substantive action on that. And that's where I think, we can look back to what we did with joint fiscal and CARES money
Right.
last year to provide kind of a guide through that.
Or we could just give the authority now to ACCD to make an adjustment in the maximum in terms of the caps.
That's certainly an option as well. And I think, again, I think we could always broaden the criteria and the flexibility for ACCD, just give them, which is not uncommon in federal programs, give them kind of the broader liberty to administer the program, give them kind of guiding principles, have them in the onset of the program outline how they intend to follow those guiding principles, and then a plan of distribution, and then have them kind of apply that plan consistently to each individual. but in a nuanced way for the individual or
I think you're saying similar to the way I would think about this is I would feel much more comfortable in giving discretion to the executive branch once we get some information in on the applications to date, because it's really hard to understand with all the moving parts and all the funding sources, what the demand is going to look like, what kind of companies are going to come forward, what their grants are going to be, how much is going to be met. And, if we had, 60 days or a couple of months of actual documents and then say, okay, based upon that, defend a change in what we've suggested thus far, I would feel much more comfortable with giving that authority. But I feel like we're working in a vacuum. So somebody throws out, and I still don't know who threw out 150,000 or 3 months, but whoever threw it out, that sort of stuck. And that's the starting point. So, all right, I know you have to go.
Yeah,
You're
your
actually
time
1
is-
minute past your time. I appreciate that. Was very thorough and clear. Thank you.
thank you.
So we'll go to Talina next. I think you're on which were first on the agenda. So welcome. Good to have you back. You know what we're talking about here, so jump right in.
That's exactly what I'll do. And I will echo many of Austin's statements. We are disappointed with the allocation of funds, and we don't quite understand the 2020 split, since the losses have already been realized over the last 6 to 8 months. And we're not sure why we would wait a year to receive help for those losses. I testified early on in January when 315 was introduced, definitely something that I fully supported for gap funding for businesses that haven't received any aid. And with the administration's ask to use this platform for the additional recovery grants, I do have some suggestions on how those might be best targeted to an industry like ours that has incredibly urgent need, that has since November seen restrictions on both gathering and travel, which has severely.
Elena, just to interrupt, the industry like yours, I know you're representing the wedding planners, but do you also represent a larger group?
Vermont Association of Wedding Professionals. So we have lodging partners, we have caterers. There are some restaurants within our membership, entertainers, photographers, any vendors who might
Okay.
see a wedding.
Thank you.
Yes,
Tent companies?
tent companies, absolutely.
Yep.
They're the base of our industry and our safe outdoor spaces that we all covet as we go into the summertime. And we want to make sure that we can all be here for those summer events. So really, we have just been hemorrhaging cash over the last 6 months because we haven't had an ability to earn revenue given the restrictions. And with the recovery grants, we want to make sure that eligibility includes these businesses that have been heavily impacted by the travel and gathering restrictions, and for those businesses that don't qualify for the programs you mentioned, such as RRF and Shuttered Venue. Those grants thankfully have large caps in the $5 to $10 million range. They also do have, as Senator Clarkson mentioned, the priority for the first 21 days. And that will be, I hope, very beneficial to Vermonters. I know I'm heavily advocating within our membership that everyone who is eligible apply. The challenge is there are several businesses, to Austin's points, that just don't qualify for those, such as tent and event rental companies, lodging properties where food is not a larger portion of their gross receipts. The target is typically 33% within the program. And also there are event venues that do not provide lodging or food. And so they all have very high fixed costs. such as property taxes, mortgage, property maintenance, and those fixed costs are not eligible under the current program either. So we definitely need the definition of fixed costs expanded. And I think there is an ability to give some flexibility to the administration on what are valid fixed costs, because they are a bit unique to the business. The other piece is currently to qualify, you must show a 2020 tax loss. That doesn't work for very many of these businesses. It also doesn't fit because these restrictions were imposed over the last 6 months, 4 of which, January, February, March, and April, were in the year 2021. So it's honestly irrelevant to their losses. They won't show on that 2020 tax return. And many businesses actually liquidated assets to make sure that they could meet their cash requirements last year. They incurred incredible amounts of debt. They dipped into their savings, into retirement funds. And also if they were a recipient of the recovery grants, that happened in late December at the 11th hour for the tax year. And they simply didn't have the time to spend that money. So that may have negated a tax loss for them. The grant should cover 6 months of fixed costs. And we're asking that the cap be increased to $300,000. And that dollar figure is, if you looked at the reporting for the past economic recovery grants, 86% of applicants had 1.5 million or less in gross receipts. And for the most part, businesses within that range, 6 months of fixed expenses fits between 150 and 300K, or at least under the 300K mark. So it really gives the program the opportunity to do tremendous good if we're able to raise that number to $300,000. I think this committee fully understands the value that the hospitality industry brings to the Vermont economy. We've shown tremendous year-over-year growth, and the projected growth over the decade following the pandemic is extremely bright. I've seen estimates that it will grow by as much as 60%, and we want to make sure that we're here to capture that. I believe there were a set of company financials shared with all of you. These businesses really have bared their business soul to you, sharing their private books so that you can have a full understanding of the critical need for aid. They have exhausted all of the programs that you have talked about: EIDL, PPP, recovery grants, SBA forbearance. Like I said, they've dipped into savings and retirement. They've negotiated with their landlords. We have worked with VITA to try to make loan programs and really called banks, anyone that'll pick up the phone. Some members have gone through the process of expensive, what do you call it? When you look at a property and assess.
Reappraisal.
Thank you. The word didn't come to me. Costly reappraisals to be able to qualify for these programs to only be denied. So their access to capital, it doesn't exist. And that's why we're looking to this committee and to these recovery grants to ensure that they have the cash that they need to be able to fulfill their 2021 contracts, because a business will get stopped dead in its tracks without cash flow. So I really look to the committee, especially after hearing our recommendations and seeing those financials. If you are a tent company or another business that has exhausted all of those resources, what do? I'm worried that it's time to burn the furniture. right? It's cold outside, all the wood is gone, and that coffee table is going to keep you warm. And I can tell you, in the case of tent rental companies, their inventory is at a premium right now, and they have a very large opportunity to liquidate those assets. And it, push is coming to shove right now. I don't know if anyone has traveled recently and tried to rent a car. It's $300 a day. And in some places, they're actually renting U-Hauls because they're cheaper. Because used cars were such a commodity and no one was traveling, they liquidated all of their assets. And, it's really important that we invest in these companies so that events are, they're a bit of a luxury and they will become out of reach if that's where we end up. And I'm really fearful that that's where we will go if they don't get this critical aid. So I'd love to take any questions and see how we can work together to make sure that this can go to those with the most urgent need. And I think one of those linchpins is making sure that one of those priority groups is for businesses that have been heavily impacted by the restrictions over the last 6 months.
I share that concern and that priority. I've been trying to pull up your 2 examples in that email. Could you send that to me again? I'm having trouble finding it. I did have some questions on it. I may get back to you later in the morning on those examples you gave. I thank you for sending those.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Talina at this point?
Mr. Chair,
Yes. Go ahead.
thanks so much, Talina. What I've been struggling with as I'm hearing all of this is how we might have an additional flexibility on the cap just for this type of business. And am I leaving out, another type of business that doesn't have as strong a lobby? But I really hear you. Can we write the language in some way that gives a slightly higher departure, knowing that removes, other people from the line potentially, but maybe people who have not been as hard hit because they have other options. I was reminded that, the restaurant money is first come, first serve around the country as well. There is an opening first for BIPOC and women-owned restaurants, which is really interesting. But it, probably then also means other restaurants will not make it in line. So, again, it's so frustrating with the first come, first serve, and who's always at the end of the line, and maybe we can still help them next January. But I'm just thinking out loud here, how would we structure any language that gives a little bit more of a nod? And I get it, there are a lot of event spaces that have not even wanted to charge people the deposits for the summer until they've had more clarity and guidance. They're really, really cash poor right now.
Yeah.
Waiting to just make sure they aren't liable for things that they can't produce. So it's just, I hear you. And so how might we give that sort of special priority is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I believe that there's room for a third tier, and those criteria are heavily impacted by the travel and gathering restrictions. And when I say heavily impacted, I would say those with at least a 25% drop in revenue. And that's just a criteria. It doesn't have any bearing on the calculation, the award amount of the grant. And, I believe I've heard from the administration that is a possibility, and it's up to them, of course, how they manage that. But it could be as simple as a question: has your business been impacted? And then it's a yes or no, and it's up to them if that is, a box where they get to further explain why. And of course, they can do their due diligence as to the what the way in which the business operates. So for example, you might be a florist who has a retail operation, and then the gathering and travel restrictions hasn't made it so that you can't have your doors open. However, another florist who relies entirely on weddings and events for their business has been heavily impacted. And that's something that they would be able to determine. And then to your point, it is definitely a concern of mine that those RRF dollars are first come, first serve. So again, I'm heavily advocating and pushing people to technical assistance, working with Darcy Carter and every other resource that is available to help our members with those applications and getting them in timely. But if it comes that that program is oversubscribed or they don't otherwise have access to those funds, I think there's a way to work with the administration on the timing so that if they get denied those funds, that they could then access the state grants. And that in that way, I further echo Austin's statements about creating language so that there is an ability to allocate additional funds if those programs are, heavily oversubscribed, and we need to allocate additional funds within the state in the way of recovery grants because the applicant pool grows.
Okay. I think to be quite honest, I think giving discretion to the administration to change the parameters of the program based on better knowledge and seeing what's out there over the next couple of months makes a lot of sense. I wish we had the time and the benefit of that information in terms of our work, but we don't. So, but to give flexibility, that I think is a possibility. To give flexibility to appropriators, I think is going to be a tougher sell, not necessarily from us, so I don't know where we would come down on, but I think on the appropriation side, in some ways, there's a case to be made in a lot of appropriations throughout state government that they would love that flexibility in the off season to do that, and then we would be, there'd be some constitutional problems almost that, the full legislature is supposed to decide on appropriations, and if we
Right.
give everything over to the Joint Fiscal Committee, some people are not going to be happy. And I know there was some
Most of the legislature would
there was
be
some discomfort last year with how much decision making we gave to the Joint Fiscal Committee last year in terms of some of your stuff and other people's stuff in terms of that. They were functioning as a mini legislature. So
Rich.
so
May I
anyhow,
just,
but you're heard, believe me, you're heard. So we'll continue to look at what we can do here because we're facing the same problem. I mean, you have a more narrow interest, but throughout the legislature, we're facing the problem of how to design something that is nimble enough with very little information and with a constantly changing landscape, and given very little time to do it in. So it's not an easy challenge.
right. Mr. Chair, may I just ask a question?
Yep.
Yeah. Hi, Talina. Remind me the number of businesses you feel at this point that are most significantly impacted in the special events and lodging. I don't see Hans on this call. I thought Hans was also testifying, but as I recall, do I recall the number 275? Are those in special events, or is that special events and lodging? I can't believe that's both.
So it is both within our membership. It's certainly not comprehensive of what's in the state. Yes, right. And I to the chair's point, that ever-changing landscape is really why we're pushing so hard that, whether it's JFC or the appropriate committee has that ability to appropriate additional funds, because I really fear that if they don't have that ability, we may be setting ourselves up for failure there to pick up businesses that are really left with nothing. If they get cut out of all of these programs, that would be devastating.
Right. Thank you. Every one of us has illustrations of businesses in our neck of the woods that are deeply impacted. Although I have to say, my barometer is a very small restaurant here in Woodstock, and it's still with us, which is amazing to me. And so I think each of us have barometers in our area of businesses, and we have, we've also gotten more, probably per capita than any other state, more money into business than, it's incredible how much has gone out into business in the last year and 2 months.
It is. It's also incredible that here I am a year
It's
later.
incredible. And we hear you that there are certain businesses significantly more affected by reduced travel and gathering restrictions. We get that loud and clear.
Vermont per capita always ranks at the top of the list in terms of tourism dollars to our state's economy. And so that's why we're driving so hard. We want to make sure we're still here and producing tax dollars.
Yep, we are all clear.
So just to follow up on Senator Clarkson's comment, do you have a feel from, I don't know how much connected you are to national groups. I should have asked Austin this question, how Vermont is doing. Have there been any studies in terms of how much help we've given out and how other states have given out help? I know it would be an apples to orange comparison for a lot of reasons. Well, not necessarily in the events, the wedding industry, I guess we probably do a hell of a lot more in weddings per capita than a state like North Dakota as a travel destination. But, how we are doing, I heard, for instance, one figure that's stuck with me, and I don't know if it's right or not, but I heard that restaurants nationwide have experienced something like a 30% closure rate, while the state of Vermont, the closure rate is less than 2%, which is probably less than the closure rate in a non-pandemic year. So we must be doing something right if those numbers are true.
Yeah. So again, the pandemic certainly has winners and losers, and in some instances, restaurants have done tremendously good, right? Some of that has to do with their own ability to pivot, to market themselves, to change to a takeout option. And the Vermont grants have been extraordinarily helpful, and also a community that's been able to rally around restaurants, right? If anyone is part of the To Go tour on Facebook, it's really phenomenal to see the support for our local restaurants. However, there are still some losers, right? Like there isn't really an ability for the community to support my business because we the restrictions have been far greater. So, even and the aid up until last year was able to counteract that. But now we need another bite at the apple because we were restricted again for another 6 months. And that's really the big challenge here. And those two need to match to be able to get us above water, because we're really drowning and we're just asking to keep our head above water. It's fixed costs. It's not revenue based, and it's just enough to get us into the summer and fall so that we can capture those tourism dollars as we begin to welcome the rest of the world back to our state.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? We're going to move on to Charles. Nathan, could you reach out to Hans? He wrote me as recently as last night. Do somebody know his status? He's the,
He's the
owner-
lodging, he's the president of the Lodging Association.
he
I
owns
thought
the
he was on deck this
hotel.
morning.
Yeah, I know we put him on the list. So could you, Nathan, can you reach out to him and see if he's planning on attending? But we'll move on to Charles at this point. Thank you, Talina.
Thanks a lot, Talina.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. Charles Martin, Vermont Chamber of Commerce. We're a signatory to the letter that Austin already highlighted, and it's submitted to the record for your committee. So I won't go line by line through that, especially considering Austin just did a really good job of doing that. What I will say is, to your earlier point, Mr. Chair, this committee and the legislature has done a lot of things right. You said, we must have done something right, and you certainly did things right in 2020. And the amount of grants that were provided were extremely meaningful, and people recognize that. And it really was a lifeline, and we would have higher closure rates if it wasn't for that work. So I do want to say that from the get-go.
Thank you.
It's just a matter of ongoing crisis, really. So you addressed things then, but the crisis is ongoing. And I'm going to kind of focus, if for those of you who aren't aware, I work and the chamber works very closely in partnership with the Independent Restaurant Association through sort of a formal agreement. So I do want to talk a little bit about the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and kind of hopefully dispense with some rhetoric that I've kind of heard across the virtual Montpelier landscape as of late. Just for some numbers, there's about $270 billion in losses across restaurant industry in the United States, and that fund is a $28.6 billion fund. So the quick math on that means there's going to be a lot of people who aren't able to access that program. It was already pointed out earlier that the program is opened up to women, veterans, and economically or socially disadvantaged communities for the first 3 weeks, which is fabulous and a great inclusion. But we recognize the demographic landscape of Vermont, and clearly that means that there are other states who will find a little bit more of a drawdown because of those provisions than Vermont. So something just to keep in mind. In Q3 as well for the state of Vermont, we had about a $200 million food and accommodations loss. So I kind of just want to put that out there to say there is basically no one who believes that RRF will not be oversubscribed quickly in Vermont. And to the extent that people would suggest maybe having to be denied RRF before you could access other grant programs, that also kind of creates a problem with the timing of it all. Because that denial period, whenever you would get that denial, would obviously have to occur prior to any grant program that the state would create when it went live, or you would just be put in the back seat anyway. So that does give me pause. And the other thing I'll say, Vermont, it's clear that Vermont received an incredible amount of resources related to COVID-19. We had our small states minimum. This legislature did a great job with the grants, but we also were, and I'm not complaining about this, it's why we had a really great health outcome. We did have some of the most strict shutdown protocols in the country, which did have an economic result attached to it. And again, I want to emphasize that's not a complaint, it's just a reality. So we did kind of have higher public spending to offset the losses that were, for lack of a better way to phrase it, the result of government mandate. So I kind of just want to state that and state that here now to kind of respond to that. And I'll take questions. I'm not going to go through that letter again because it's already been done 2 or 3 times. But I do just want to say that the Restaurant Revitalization Fund is going to be meaningful, but it will not be the godsend that some have kind of framed it to be for restaurants in Vermont. And happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Do you have an identical position to Austin on the cap language that was in 315? Or would you like to, recognizing that if we change that, there's going to be winners and losers. And it seems to me that the losers are going to be the smaller businesses that have less than, however we define need, less than $150,000 that wouldn't bump up against the cap, they're going to have less money available to them.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and you're right. That is probably one of the most difficult questions of designing this program, because you're absolutely right. An insert arbitrary amount might be meaningful to a small restaurant in a rural county town, but obviously that's not the same level of meaning for a ski area or a event space, especially if they need a lot of revenue throughput. I don't know that my position on that deviates from Austin's. It's pretty difficult, but I think we could adjust caps related to the reporting that the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is obligated to provide to the legislature in some capacity through the existing grant programs.
I just want to say for the record that when this program first started, I was a big proponent of increasing the caps because they were so low, like at 30,000 or something. I said, how does that help a big business, some of our bigger businesses? So I hear what you're saying, but when we're dealing with, I know you'd like to see the money increase, but when we're dealing with a fixed amount of money, it's this, it's a balance of the number of grantees we can give money out versus the size of the grants. And do you know where those original numbers came from? Who proposed those?
I actually don't know what they were born out of, Mr. Chair, unfortunately.
Okay.
I completely hear you on that. And I would say, it's going to be a difficult conversation, but I don't know that I could say where those numbers were developed from in the original proposal.
I can find out, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
We can ask. I'll ask.
Any other questions for Charles? Okay. Let's go on. We have, I think, 3 more witnesses. I don't know who's first on the list, Morgan or Roxanne. Morgan, why don't we just start with you?
Hi, Mr. Chair, thank you so much for having me today. And thank you for the opportunity to come before the committee. For the record, I'm Morgan Nichols, and I'm the State Director of Main Street Alliance of Vermont. And I'm pretty much going to echo everyone before me. We thank this committee and the legislature writ large for all that they have done to support Vermonters throughout the pandemic, particularly in your continuing efforts to find the balance to support both of our small businesses, our workers, and our families. We're so grateful also to the committee for the continued commitment to digging into the important and necessary work to support Vermont's BIPOC businesses and for your support of the Better Places program. We want to make sure we lift that up, and thank you for that. I want to start by saying that I understand that the budget has passed out of Senate appropriations and appreciate the opportunity to share our perspective on the current proposal. I hope that as the legislature moves into the committee of conference, that they will factor in the ongoing and continued need within our business community and allocate additional funding for economic recovery grants. We are deeply concerned that we know that there is a demonstrated $500 million in unmet need and that there's only an additional $20 million appropriated towards additional business support with no mechanism or opportunity for additional funding until the legislature resumes in January of 2022. We hope that steps are taken to address this to provide more flexibility and security for our business community. We know that there are many who feel businesses have received enough, but we also know that we continue to talk to businesses every day who have been unable to access funds and are deeply concerned about the road ahead and their ability to capture the summer's business. For those businesses who are seasonal, even if they capture this summer and fall, they likely have another long and difficult winter ahead of them. One business owner and mother of 2 shared with me a few weeks ago that she felt like she was in the last few miles of a marathon and her legs were starting to give way. If we don't provide the supports in these critical months for some of our businesses, the funding that we have given all along the way will have been for nothing if we don't get them across the finish line. Here's just a few examples that I've heard from. We've heard from a yoga studio in Burlington who is deeply concerned that people will remain hesitant about coming back into their space to practice. While the CARES Act funding and the state grants indeed enabled them to pivot their business to operate online, that money is running out. Their landlords need them to pay rent, and they will still have to abide by capacity guidance based on their square footage. one of our restaurants in White River Junction is thrilled at the potential opportunity to get support through the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. But he also shared with me that the town of Hartford is planning to undertake their downtown construction this summer, all but closing down their main street and delivering another hit to the business district this summer. And as I said, I'll echo that I'm hearing from the events and hospitality industry that winters are long, and even in the best of scenarios, if they're able to capture as much of the summer as possible, it's going to be almost another year until they're kind of back on their feet and back at fighting weight. So we ask that the legislature reconsider this appropriation and further allocate an additional amount of money that can be drawn down by the Joint Fiscal Committee later this year, should there be an additional need as shown through the subscription of the grant through Act 315, H315, Act 9. To have no mechanism or potential earmark for this funding creates an incredibly long and potentially catastrophic cliff for those businesses who might need some additional support down the road. Vermont small businesses fuel our economy, provide good jobs, they shape our community identities, and help to create the magnetism for our tourism economy. Like all stakeholders throughout this pandemic, we just need to get them through to the other side, and we hope that you will help us to do that. I thank you for your time and consideration. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you. The question I have is, do you have any ideas for us? I mean, I think we're all sympathetic to targeting this money as best as possible. And ultimately, the target and the amount of the money is based upon what is needed to get people to the other side, to prevent closure. But how, it's so hard to define that without, almost there being an individual interviewing process by ACCD going through people's books and say, what are you doing here? I mean, what are we missing? I know you want more money, but putting that aside, with the money we have, what kind of factor or process would you suggest that could really target this money in an administratively possible way to the businesses that are facing closure?
Sure, it's a great question, and it's been a perennial issue that we've been facing throughout this pandemic. And I know that I'm in good company when we've said that we want to ensure that there's proper outreach, technical assistance provided to businesses, especially for our smallest businesses who haven't had the ability to access these funds. Especially, I know Talina lifted this up. A first come, first serve situation for many businesses doesn't even allow them to get to the table, on time to access these funds. I know that when I've heard from businesses and I've been able to connect them in with ACCD, the ability to kind of double back and make sure that they're dotting I's and crossing T's, the business owners to be able to access those funds has been an incredible resource. But we also understand that that's an administrative burden. We hope that other stakeholders within and technical assistance providers would support ACCD as they're going through this process, to be able to potentially provide that support for the agency. But
they have. There's been a lot of partnering.
There has been, yes.
And
that we would, my point would be that we would continue to ensure that that those technical assistance providers would be brought to the table as we're administering this next grant.
Do you, I'm not sure exactly what ACCD is thinking, and we have some say over how they think, but in terms of first come, first serve, do you have a problem with that degree of specificity? Should we set up a program where, the program is open for 45 days or 30 days, and they take all the applications in, look at them, and maybe do if there's oversubscribed, do a proportional reduction to cover all the people who have applied? Have you thought that through, and do you have any recommendations on that?
Sure. It is my understanding that in H315, there is that prioritization, and that they are doing an application period for that first group, so that they would be reviewing and then developing what the grant allocation would be. We do believe that is a preferential process to ensure that those businesses who just have the resources and a CPA or the payroll company, right, to be able to develop those applications and present them, just don't get first in line right at the get-go. And I will note, for our smallest businesses and for our new businesses who are getting the first bite at that apple, this will be the first time that they've applied. So they haven't had to do this work previously to prepare these documents. So we're doing everything we can to reach out to these businesses and connect them with the technical assistance providers so that they're ready once the application portal is open.
There's been a great deal of discussion about in H3 giving preferential treatment to people who've gotten nothing. And in terms of, is there a lot of people out there who haven't applied or have got nothing? Do you have any feel for that? I mean, in terms of your connection with your members, are there hundreds that you've identified that have gotten nothing? Or are we talking about, I know you don't have the whole world at your fingertips, but I'm just at a loss as to how many businesses with all this outreach at this point and all the publicity have gotten nothing from the state or the feds at this point. So do you have a feel for that?
I have done, especially in these last 4 months, an intentional and thoughtful outreach to our newer businesses, our BIPOC businesses, our women-owned businesses. And I would say that there are, of those businesses, and I probably have 6 to 8 calls a week, right, that I'm trying to just connect with businesses. And you'd be surprised how many there was just one thing that prevented them from their ability to access, right? From a new business. There's one business in Burlington who purchased an 18-year-old business. So it's a new EIN, but has all of the data to be able to show what this kind of landmark business in Burlington is. But because it's under a new EIN, she wasn't able to access anything, right? And I think that it's heartbreaking, because she purchased a business that she knows is a viable model, right? But just wasn't able to get that entry point. So she's on my list. We just got the guidance from ACCD to just connect with and just say, I need you to know that this is available to you right now. I heard from our business owner, who's a restaurant owner in White River Junction, that his friend, who he's been doing a lot of technical assistance outreach to, who owns a Cambodian restaurant in White River, hasn't been able to get anything from the state. I think they've been able to access some at the federal level, but because the way the state grant programs were set up, they weren't able to access the state programs, but they are in desperate need for additional funding, because the federal money has been exhausted.
So when all is said and done, I guess what I'm looking for is, do you expect there to be 1,000 applicants for this $10 million of people who have not gotten anything, or you think it's going to be more like 100 applicants?
Oh, I would say it's far above 100. I would hate to speculate the number. All I know is that I can say that I and all of my colleagues on this call are doing everything we can to ensure that we're doing as much outreach as possible, so that everyone knows about this program and that we're providing them with technical assistance to be able to be prepared to apply. I wish I had a number for you, sir, but I don't.
Okay, that's okay. We're glad you're out there doing this work. Thank you for that. Anybody have any questions for Morgan? Senator Clarkson?
No, not for Morgan. I think everybody has been very clear on the challenge we face.
Okay.
I was just wondering if we might actually be able to take a break when it's appropriate.
If folks want to break, let's see, we probably should.
We've
Hans,
been going 2 hours.
Hans and Roxanne, could you stick with us for another? We're going to take a 10-minute break. Is
And
that?
Hans is with us also, which is great.
Let's see. Let's see.
I would like to, I'll try. I have a meeting that it's one of those meetings I cannot get around that starts at 10:30. And
Oh, well,
what I'll do is I can go off and come back in a little bit, or what would you prefer?
can you come back at 11, do you think?
Yeah.
That would be
I'll
great.
break that then at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. And Roxanne, we'll get you on at 10:45. Okay.
Okay, great. Are we staying on this call and then just